The Document Strategy Podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Visit audibletrial.com/document for a free audiobook download and a free trial membership. Choose from over 150,000 audiobooks. Get your free download at audibletrial.com/document. Welcome to the Document Strategy Podcast, where we explore methods, tactics, and techniques to design strategies for documents, technology, and people. I'm your host, Kevin Craine, and this is episode number 58 for January 2014. Play dumb. Be boring. Don't solve problems, and above all, don't be yourself. Not exactly what you'd expect to hear from a communications expert, but these counterintuitive strategies are precisely what we need to interact productively and meaningfully in today's digital world. At least, that's according to my guest today, author Geoffrey Tumlin. Do you ever feel that our over-reliance on smartphones, tablets, and 24/7 connection to the internet is eroding our communications skills? Have you ever thought that all of the electronic gadgets and technology aimed at keeping us connected are in fact eroding our abilities to connect and communicate in valuable human terms? Despite having hundreds of social media followers and friends, have you noticed that it's getting harder and harder to connect? That's what I'll be discussing with Dr. Geoffrey Tumlin, author of the book Stop Talking, Start Communicating. Geoff's new book combines scientific research with real-world strategies to present an approach to more effective communication in today's technology-driven business world. Geoff addresses one of the biggest challenges we all face in business and in life, and that is effectively maintaining a thoughtful and human touch in our interactions in the face of the tremendous amounts of data, technology, media, messages, and content that bombard us each day. What are the implications of all this hyper-communicating? How can we deal with message overload and distractions to communicate better? And what can professionals do to boost their success despite the fact that we all must inevitably use and work with data and technology every day? All of that and more in this episode of the Document Strategy Podcast. Promotional consideration for the Document Strategy Podcast has been provided by McGraw-Hill. Visit mhprofessional.com. Since 1995, Crawford Technologies has been the driving force behind high-volume transactional customer communications for many of the world's top organizations, and their solutions are the products of choice for corporations and service bureaus around the globe. Transform print streams to and from virtually any format. Alter, enhance, modify, or add advertising to transactional documents without application changes. Archive and store and manage customer communications in ways that save money, build efficiencies, and enable new opportunities. Visit crawfordtech.com for more information. That's crawfordtech.com.
You're listening to the Document Strategy Podcast.
Welcome back. I'm pleased to have Geoff Tumlin on the podcast. Geoffrey holds a PhD and a master's from the University of Texas at Austin and a BS from West Point, and he's a faculty fellow at the University of Austin. He's the founder and CEO of Mouthpiece Consulting, a communications consulting company, and president of On Demand Leadership, a leadership development firm. He's got a new book out called Stop Talking, Start Communicating: Counterintuitive Secrets to Success in Business and in Life. Geoff Tumlin, welcome to the Document Strategy Podcast. In your book, you say that the communication revolution has transformed our lives so quickly that we're still scrambling to understand the changes that these new tools have unleashed, and not all of the changes are positive. How so?
One of the things that I think is noteworthy about the digital communication revolution that we've had is that it's actually come to change the way that we view communication. And so, from the most kind of philosophical view, communication is what enabled us to emerge from the cave and start living with increasingly larger groups of people in a civilized manner. So with this ability to interact in a thoughtful way that helped us form the civilization that we enjoy and appreciate today. But what's happened unusually in the digital communication revolution is that because we have so many new ways to communicate, and they're remarkable, and there's so much that's wonderful about the ways we can reach out and connect with people today. But because we have so many ways to do it, and because we, in general, enjoy communicating so much and making connections with other people, there's been an overwhelming increase in the amount of communicating we're doing in a given day. That's put pressure on how we communicate, and we've started to gravitate towards increasingly expedient ways of transmitting our messages, a text or an email instead of a phone call or a face-to-face conversation, for example. All of these factors have come together and caused a philosophical shift in our approach of communication. It's changed from being the way that we make our life and the glue of our civilization into something that we do on a to-do list and knock out, just like picking up so many groceries at the grocery store. And that's it's been a very insidious transformation from communication into something that we do and increasingly away from the way we make our life.
Smartphones and iPads and 24/7 connection to the internet, these things seem like they have enhanced and expanded both business and interpersonal communication, but you say that our fascination with these tools and gadgets is in fact hampering our efforts by helping to scatter our limited attention into too many areas.
Right. I think that the battle that many of us face today is to garner our focus and our attention. One of the things that I mention in the book is, look, I'm in my 40s now, and when I compare the Geoff of today in my 40s to the Geoff in my 20s, that guy in the 20s, he was radically underdeveloped, nowhere near as smart, and had all kinds of rough edges and quirks and so forth to the Geoff of today. But that Geoff in the 20s, he was a lot more productive when he sat down to do some work, because there were nowhere near the kind of tantalizing diversions that require heroic levels of self-discipline and focus to overcome. And what's happened in the intervening 20 years is that for many of us, we're getting better in so many other ways and growing and doing all the things that normal people do as they age. They get better and smarter in a lot of things. But the environment where we're supposed to come together and garner our focus has become monumentally hard. It's engineered itself to be, Kevin, we couldn't possibly create an environment less conducive to focused work and the garnering of our critical attention than the environment that most of us face with a smartphone at the ready and constantly connected to a cornucopia of diversions that are tantalizing and fantastic.
Yeah, well, I've got to agree with you. And one story in your book that really resonated with me is about the fact that back a couple of decades ago, I assume you were pursuing your graduate or your postgraduate degree, you could write a complete research paper in one sitting, but today it's tough to produce a grocery list without stopping to check your email or click over to Google News. I know I do that, consistently flipping between these venues, and all of that takes a toll on personal and business productivity, doesn't it?
Yes, I believe so, and I believe that what most of us feel anecdotally, this crazy urge to basically, when we're sitting at a computer or holding a phone in our hand or whatever, to do anything except for the important work that we need to do. I want to do anything else but the work I'm supposed to be doing. That urge is increasingly being borne out. The cost of those types of switching costs and distracting ourselves is increasingly being borne out in the research that's emerging on focus and productivity and distractions and switching costs and so forth. And the research is catching up to what many of us feel and have felt for some time deep inside of us, which is, my goodness, why is it so hard to actually harness my attention when I've had a lifetime of being able to do it fairly easily? And, in part, the answer is that the barriers to that type of concentrated thought are rising, because here's the problem with these distractions and our devices and so forth. Kevin, it's not that they're terrible that's causing us trouble. It's that they're so amazingly awesome. If I want to, right now on my smartphone, I could click a few buttons and I could be streaming Dexter, the TV show, to myself, right? I mean, you know how great that is to be able to do that? What? How could anything compete with being able to stream Dexter in a few clicks on a smartphone, or being able to play the lottery, the email lottery, where 1 in every 25 messages happens to have some interesting piece of good news or something that just keeps you coming back, like the person clicking on the button of the slot machine in Vegas. And so we've engineered a very tough environment to harness focus and attention when you can go back and read books that are thousands of years old. And what people who've thought about the human condition have been saying since time immemorial is it's that ability to harness our attention and to put it towards a meaningful use that's a very outsized predictor of this thing called a meaningful life.
Well, I know I am required to juggle hundreds of emails and voicemails and now text messages and tweets and LinkedIn messages and Facebook posts. It seems to me that not only the amount of communication has increased, but also the types and formats of those communications. I'm not always certain of the value of all that stuff. And indeed, your book talks about the downside, that all of this leads to an environment full of message overload, distractions. So what's all the implication of all this hyper-communicating?
My singular concern, and a large part of the reason that I wrote the book, is that I'm concerned that the increasing quantity of expedient or easy messaging choices that we're picking every day. I choose to send text or emails instead of call or talk face-to-face. I choose to crank out a quick message to someone instead of take my time and respond more deliberately. Because the digital communication revolution has given us tools that tend to promote these kind of quick messaging strategies, and because hypercommunication, meaning what you just mentioned, you wake up and there's all these things I have to attend to. I have these dozen people every day who have birthdays on Facebook, and then these people are asking me for stuff on LinkedIn, and I'm supposed to be doing a blog, and then there's work to be done for a client, and then the email is constant, and people are text messaging me, and so on and so forth. That's the hyper-communicating environment where we're doing so much more communication now than before. All of these things come together and make it smart for us, or seem smart, to quickly cut through messages as fast as we can to reduce the load. And so what's happened is, and this is my singular concern, our preference for communication that's easy and expedient is eroding our ability to do the more difficult communication things that we need and want to do. And so, for example, I'm getting better and better at sending quick emails, at typing out 4 or 5 word responses on Facebook or text message or wherever. I'm getting better and better at that, but I'm spending less time doing harder things like resolving conflict, like persuading someone, like trying to reach out and convince someone to, I'm married, but convince someone to go on a date with me, buy my product. These are higher order communication skills, but they require thoughtfulness and deliberation, when our default has become communicating in ways that are expedient and quick. Consequently, I'm concerned that all of us, from young junior all the way up to, the oldest people in the workforce, are basically playing communication checkers all day, and yet we still need to be able to pull off more complicated communication chess moves, but when we reach for those skills, they're increasingly rusty. That is what I'm concerned about.
It's time for a short break. I'm speaking with Geoffrey Tumlin, author of the book Stop Talking, Start Communicating. Play dumb, be boring, blow things off, lose your friends, and other counterintuitive secrets to success in business and in life. When we get back, I'm going to ask Geoff about some of these counterintuitive secrets and how both businesses and individuals can use them to communicate better in today's digital world. So stick around. We'll be right back with this episode of the Document Strategy Podcast. In today's economically challenging business environment, every company must do more with less. But how do you effectively market your company when your advertising budget has been slashed? With Transpromo Express from Crawford Technologies, you can turn monthly statements into powerful promotional tools. Add customized messages and promotional offers to the documents you already send. Find out more about Transpromo Express at crawfordtech.com. That's crawfordtech.com. Do you have great ideas but need expert writing skills to make them leap from the page? Do you have a great product or service that needs better exposure to new customers, potential partners, or the media? Craine Communications Group is a strategic communications agency focused on the document management and customer communications industries. Expert writing and editing, audio success stories and custom podcasts, effective media relations, and dependable and professional industry-focused expertise and service. There is no other writing and communications agency with more expertise in the industry. Find out more today at cranegroup.com. That's CRAINE, cranegroup.com.
You're listening to the Document Strategy Podcast.
Welcome back. I'm with Geoffrey Tumlin, author of the book Stop Talking, Start Communicating. Geoff, in your book, you point to a number of counterintuitive secrets to success. Stop talking, play dumb, be boring, blow things off. Okay, I'll buy it. What do you mean by that, and how does that all work?
What I'm suggesting is that our first adaptation to the digital age isn't quite working. And so there's many more things that we should love about our digital tools than not love, but it still hasn't been a great fit between the tools we have for communicating and the ways that we're communicating. And so because of that, I'm suggesting that we need to do some things very differently. The first is stop talking, because if you believe, as I do, that the problem is hypercommunication, too much communication, happening without enough thought, then the answer to our problems, Kevin, can't possibly be more communication, because that is the problem. And so I completely believe and stand by the following statement: the best way to improve your communication is to stop talking. And the reason for that is once you stop, you have a much greater chance of reinserting thoughtfulness into your interaction. And that's what's missing. As communication becomes more expedient, it exerts pressure on the thoughtful nature of ourselves. Simply put, and this is, a big simplification, but there's a constant battle between the back of our brainstem, the lizard brain or the Neanderthal brain, and the front of our brainstem, or I should say the front of our prefrontal cortex, our forehead. It's a battle between the civilized part of our brain and the more primitive. And strangely enough, these remarkably sophisticated digital devices push the buttons of our lizard brain a lot more than they push the buttons of our thoughtful brain. And that's what's missing. A little bit more deliberation, a little bit more thoughtfulness, and that will eliminate an enormous amount of the damaging communication errors that many of us are making that are piling up and straining our relationships and diminishing our productivity.
You point to 3 essential communication habits that we're neglecting as a result of the digital communication revolution. Listen like every sentence matters, talk like every word counts, and act like every interaction is important. Can you talk a little bit about those habits, why they're neglected and why they're important?
Right. It flows just from what we were talking about having more thoughtfulness in our communication. And about 80% of my book is very pragmatic tips for do this, don't do this, here's how you get out of this situation, here's how you talk with difficult people, and so forth. That's probably about 80% of my book. But there is a smaller part of my book that talks about these kind of more philosophical or aspirational goals. And you mentioned the 3 biggest ones. Listen like every sentence matters, talk like every word counts, and act like every interaction is important. If someone who is reading my book didn't remember any of the other dozens or maybe even hundreds of ideas, strategies, and tips inside it, it would be enough, Kevin, just to remember that you listen, you talk, and then you act like every single conversation you're having is important and is meaningful. And if you had that as an aspirational goal, a lot of the problems and struggles of the digital era would fade away. The errors would diminish because you would be putting back the thoughtfulness in charge of our communication. The forehead that got us out of the cave is being dampened by a type of communication that our Neanderthal ancestors would have remembered, because it places expedient, impulse, and speed as its highest criteria. And so these 3 habits, listen like every sentence matters, talk like every word counts, and act like every interaction is important, those are aspirational goals designed to push back against the expediency and the speed that's endemic to a lot of our contemporary communication.
Well, there's some social implications to all of this. I mean, for instance, today it's possible to accumulate scores of Facebook friends and Twitter followers and so forth and still feel lonely. How is that? And what does it mean for the new generation of, I guess, millennials who have grown up with this digital norm?
Kevin, I don't know what it means. I mean, we're running an experiment of having significantly changed the ways that we can reach out and be in contact with other people. But like we said just a little bit earlier, there's something that's just a little bit weird about these ways of reaching out. It is goofy that I can surf the internet for hours and still feel strangely isolated, and that I can have hundreds and hundreds of Facebook friends that feel like nobody's actually listening, or we're just talking past each other. I think that that's because the types of interactions we crave are meant to be just a little bit deeper than that. I'm not suggesting that all of our interactions should be, they don't have to be rich, robust, and meaningful. I'm not suggesting that at all. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything inherently wrong with Facebook. But I think that we've made an error in thinking that connectivity equals connection when that isn't always the case. Humans also crave a deeper a richer and a more meaningful way of connecting to other people, so that we literally feel in our bones that we're not the only people on this rock, that someone else understands, that someone is attending and completely present with me in what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And the internet and digital connections are excellent, superlative at many things, to include keeping us in touch, spreading information, sending and receiving messages, but they're just not quite as good as some of that deep, rich, and meaningful interaction that gives so much of our life pleasure, and that I think we're finding is so indispensable to the human condition.
It's time for another short break. I'm speaking with author and communications expert Dr. Geoffrey Tumlin. We've got just a few more minutes with Geoff, so stick around. When we get back, we'll talk some more. The Document Strategy Podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. Please visit audibletrial.com/document for a free audiobook download. Choose from over 150,000 audiobook titles and get a free trial membership. Go to audibletrial.com/document. Are you enjoying this interview with Geoffrey Tumlin and want to get a copy of his book? You can get your copy of Stop Talking, Start Communicating, along with books from all our great guest authors at the Document Strategy store at document-strategy.com/store. You'll find them all there, ready to buy direct from Amazon. But when you purchase from us through our link, you support the podcast and support our great guests. So please check out the store at document-strategy.com/store for your copy of Stop Talking, Start Communicating by Geoffrey Tumlin. Welcome back. Geoffrey, as you were putting the book together and doing your research, what were the cornerstone discoveries that helped anchor and inspire your book?
I think the biggest discovery for me, as someone who spent many years thinking and researching communication, is that as I tried to figure out what is it that's made this digital communication revolution, it's still so full of promise, but it just hasn't realized. But the quandary I was trying to solve, Kevin, is everything suggests that this should be the golden age of communication. These devices, the connectivity we have, we should be able to be experiencing a renaissance in how we're reaching out with people and how that's making us feel in our life. But all too often, the promise of the digital revolution hasn't been fulfilled, and instead the very devices that we thought would bring us together have come to put distance between us. And so I want to know why. That's a riddle. That's a crazy riddle, to have the most powerful communication devices in the history of human civilization in our hands, but not be able to fully capitalize on that and translate it into the kinds of productive and meaningful connections we crave. And what I discovered is that we, or all of us, I should say, because we fell in love with the digital communication revolution and plunged headfirst into emailing and, texting and so on and so forth. But we forgot three things about communication that are inherent in the nature of communication that are coming to bite us now, and it's called collateral damage. And the first is that we forgot just how powerful communication is. The second is we forgot that it's fundamentally imperfect. And the third is that we haven't properly accounted for the fact that communication is asymmetrical. And so, briefly, what happens is these three factors, communication, our words are powerful, they're very meaningful. It's also imperfect in that no matter what we do, in a certain percentage of our interaction, there's going to be miscommunication, errors, slips, faux pas, and so forth. And third, it's asymmetrical in that the errors count against us much more than the successes count for us. And so there's no way to tell anyone or teach anyone how to have great relationships in 5 minutes or 5 tips or in 5 seconds or 5 interactions, because you build great relationships at work and at home, one conversation at a time over weeks and months and years. But the asymmetry of communication is that you can dismantle even your strongest relationships in seconds of hasty words. And so these three things have come together in a hyper-communicating environment to mean that more communication with less time spent on each message returns errors at a compounding rate that pile up in our relationships and cause damage faster than we can repair it. And so from that central revelation about what we didn't account for in the digital revolution, in other words, there's grave danger in piling on more and faster communication because errors are endemic and they're more costly. And so you add more communication and subtract thoughtfulness to that communication, and you're going to strain your most important relationships. And so from that realization, that is what I believe accounts for the unfulfilled promise of the digital communication revolution, for the fact that most people don't feel that all of the remarkable advances in how we can communicate with each other have translated into better communication in our lives. We got more communication and more problems, which has led to more strain, because more communication does not equal better communication. It leads to more communication and more problems. Everything else flowed from my book once that understanding was in place as the central dilemma, the thing that was the most awkward and offsetting about the digital revolution. And that's what all of my solutions are about, trying to put back into place.
In today's business environment, you can't help but use the types of communication technologies that we've been talking about today. How can business professionals today use the ideas and principles in your book, even though they must inevitably use technology to communicate?
Two things that stand out much more than anything else, because I'm the biggest optimist out there, because in my view of communication, it's so important to us, it's so vital, and it means so much to us that it's going to survive. We're going to figure out our way out of this. Here are the two most important things that people should do right now to start grabbing a hold of more of the promise of the digital communication and shedding more of the problems that have been associated with it. The first thing is that everyone is going to have to figure out a way to harness their attention and not be distracted by the switching costs of the myth of multitasking, because the studies are coming in quite clearly that you can't do multiple cognitive tasks without it exerting a switching cost and diminishing your capabilities. And so the very first piece is we have to figure out how to protect those periods of our day so we can do uninterrupted work, the work that's the most meaningful and most important to us. That's the first piece. And the second piece is, under no condition do I think that we should not use some of the lower order or more expedient communication methods, like text messaging, cell phone, Facebook, and so forth and so on. They're remarkably powerful and remarkably good at many things. But what I'm worried about is that people's more difficult skills are eroding. And so the countermeasure to that is none of us are going to stop emailing and texting and so forth, and most of us aren't going to stop social media, and that's just the nature of how we interact today. But figure out a way to put in at least one harder communication thing in your day and pay attention to how it's going. Instead of sending an email, walk down the hall and talk to your colleague. Instead of sending a text message, call and talk to your wife about what you're going to do for dinner. These things sound small, but they will keep us in the practice of doing some of the harder tools are remarkable. The two correctives that we need to put in place right now to take more advantage of them: one, everybody has to figure out their own method for protecting at least some of their time in an uninterrupted fashion so they can do the work that they were meant to do during the day. And two, we have to ensure that our higher order and more difficult communication skills aren't eroding from lack of use.
Geoff, I want to thank you for being a guest today. Where can our listeners go to find out more about you and what you do and to contact you?
Go to Tumlin.com, Tumlin.com, or mouthpiececonsulting.com.
Geoff, I really want to thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you, Kevin. I really enjoyed the opportunity.
That'll do it for this episode of the Document Strategy Podcast. If you'd like to get a copy of Geoff Tumlin's new book, you can get a discount and help support the podcast by going to our podcast store at documentstrategy.com. You can also go to the podcast archive page, look for episode number 58, and click on the book from there. Get a discount, support our authors, help the podcast, and buy from Amazon. Otherwise, join us next time when we continue to explore methods, technologies, and techniques to design document and customer communication strategies that result in bottom-line benefits. I'm your host, Kevin Craine. Thanks for listening. Document-strategy.com